ברוכות הבאות, ברוכות הנמצאות. So good to be back after a wonderful week. Took a break, but we're back again. We have a lot to do today, so we're going to get started. This week's parasha is Parshat Masei, which tells us that during the travels of Bnei Yisrael in the Midbar, they arrived at a mountain called Har. And that's the place where Rabanit Cohen alav shalom died. The pasuk tells us, "Vayachanu behar biktzei eretz Edom." The mountain was on the border of the land of Edom. Vaya'al Aharon Cohen el har al pi Hashem, and Aaron went up to the mountain as instructed by Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Vayamat sham, and there he died. Bishnat 40 betzet Yisrael mimitzrayim. It was in the 40th year following the exodus of Egypt. B'chodesh hachamishi be'echad lachodesh. In the 5th month, on the 1st day of the month. Ve'aharon ben 23 u'mea shana b'moto behar. And Aharon was 123 years old when he died. And the Chachamim want to know why the Torah HaKadosha feels the need to repeat this information if we were already told in Parashat Chukat that Aharon met Sham. And why are we told not only that he died, but we're provided very interesting details. First of all, we're told that the mountain was on the border of Edom. And then we're told the date of the occurrence was on the 1st day of the 5th month. And then we're told that he was 123 years old. Now, all this information should have been told to us the first time around. So why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu wait until this parasha to provide us with these details? So I'm now going to teach you a very, very interesting concept. Chachamim tell us that the death of Rabanit Cohen was not only the death of a human being. According to many Sfarim, Aharon was actually a human representation of the Bet HaMikdash. That means that you could have a Bet Mikdash as a structure of bricks, but there's also a structure of the Bet HaMikdash in a certain human being in which he epitomizes the Bet HaMikdash. The Chachamim are telling us that the death of Aharon is equal to the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. Aharon was Kohen Gadol. He was the manager of the Mishkan. Therefore, his death represented the destruction, and that of the Bet HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. Ladies, when the second Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, it was done so by the Romans, whom we refer to as Edom. They were Malchut Edom. We're still in that exile called Galut Edom, and we have been for over 2,000 years now. And this is why we're told, Vaya'al Aharon el Har Vayamat Sham. Where is Har? Biktzei Eretz Edom. It's at the borders of Edom. The Torah is hinting to us that when the Bet HaMikdash is going to be destroyed, it's going to put us in the territory of Edom, in that exile. And when did Aaron die? He died on the 1st day of the 5th month. The 5th month of the year is Av. Rosh Chodesh Av is the Haskara of Aharon HaKohen. And every year Parashat Masei will always coincide with Rosh Chodesh Av because the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed in the month of Av. And therefore, that was already predetermined when Rabanit Cohen died on Rosh Chodesh Av, which is a month that ushers in Jewish tragedy and national pain and suffering. So the Torah HaKadosha is hinting to us that Aharon died exactly around the same time of year when Jews in the future mourn the loss of our Bet Mikdash. The Chachamim tell us that the age in which he died is also very significant, because the Mishkan was built a certain size. From the outside, if you measured it from point A to point B, it measured 30 amot, 30 cubits. But the inside of the Mishkan was divided into two parts. One part measured 20 cubits, and the Kodesh HaKodashim measured 10 cubits. So it measured 10 by 20 by 30. Now in Gematria, if you remove the zeros, you're left with which numbers? You have 10 by 20 by 30. What numbers are you left with if you drop the zeros? You're left with the numbers 1, 2, and 3. And Aharon Cohen lived 123 years. So each of the numbers in his lifetime represented another aspect of the Mishkan. 1 represented the Kodesh HaKodashim. 2 represented the outside of the Kodesh HaKodashim. And 3 represented the measurement of the entire structure of the Mishkan. That means that even the amount of years that he lived corresponds to the Mishkan. And therefore, look at the divine design of the Torah HaKdosha. This is a Pele Plaot. This is a nes. Now, when Aaron died in Parashat Chukat, we mourned the human that passed on. But in this week's parasha, we're not mourning the person who died, we're mourning what he represented. And therefore, what a striking symbolism it is that will soon begin the period of intense mourning on Rosh Chodesh Av, which is the yahrzeit of Aaron Cohen, who died at the border of Edom, the exile which we're currently in. But even more than this is a fascinating concept. You see, at the end of our parasha, there is a law concerning a person who murders another person by accident. And the halakha says that all unintentional murderers must live in a city of refuge. It's called an ir miklat. Now, this is a kapara for them, because they have to leave their families and they have to live in exile. For how long? Until the Kohen Gadol dies. Once the Kohen Gadol dies, all the people who are living in this ir miklat, in this exile, are set free. Question is, why is their freedom dependent on the Kohen Gadol's death? The answer is, the Gemara says, because it was his fault. His fault. What did the Kohen Gadol do, misken? So the Gemara says, it's his fault because he didn't pray hard enough for these people. His job is to pray hard that no one should die unintentionally or intentionally, and that such accidents should not take place in the world. And if this occurrence took place, it means that the Kohen Gadol did not pray hard enough. He didn't have the right kavanot. So the Kohen Gadol is actually connected to this tragedy, and therefore, when he dies, it's only fitting that the people in exile should be released. That's one explanation. But I want to share with you today what the Zohar Kadosh says. It's a very deep thought. Question is, do you know why their freedom, these people's freedom, is dependent on the Kohen Gadol? Chachamim tell us that when a tzaddik perishes from the world, it's a great day in Shamayim. All the tzaddikim in Shamayim come out and they welcome this new tzaddik that entered the Shamayim. When a tzaddik dies, we're told it's like a Sefer Torah that rises up and goes back into the Hechal HaKadosh. According to our Sfarim, the death of a tzaddik in Shamayim is a very special moment. Perhaps for us, not so much on earth, but in Shamayim, it's a big day. Says the Zohar Kadosh, tells us that on the day that a tzaddik dies, it's such a great day in the heavens that from Shamayim, some mechilot are granted, are extended. Some pardons are given out. So in Shamayim, in other words, there's such a good mood up there that HaKadosh Baruch Hu in His kindness, as a result of the Kohen Gadol's Kivyachol, that this tzaddik's passing, he says all those people who are in exile, all those people who are experiencing a personal galut in their lives, they're now going to be set free. When the king is happy, says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he wants to create happiness for everybody, even for those who are on earth, not just the people in Shamayim, not just the Neshamot in Shamayim. So listen to this. When the Kohen Gadol dies, you know what that does? It has the ability to take people that are in exile out of exile. Every single year, when the yahrzeit of Aaron Cohen rolls around on Rosh Chodesh Av, we commemorate his death. And on that day, on Rosh Chodesh Av, there's a tremendous simcha in the Shamayim, because that's when Aaron died. This was when the tzaddik died. Therefore, it's a day where people who are in exile have the opportunity to be redeemed from that exile. Not only from a personal galut, like the person who killed Beshogeg, but a national exile. Rosh Chodesh Av then becomes one of the most favorable days because we have a chance to be redeemed as a people. Because on the day that the Kohen Gadol dies, we could be set free. And on that day, there's a great hita'orerut in the Shamayim. There's a great awakening in the heavens. Borei Olam's compassion is aroused on this day. And he says, the paradigm Kohen Gadol, today is his Haskara. And therefore, he looks down and he says, who's still in exile? Mi adayin bagalut. We're still in exile. This girl is still in exile. That couple is still in exile. This one who wants to have a baby and can't have a baby is still in exile. And therefore, this parasha will always come out at the beginning of the month of Av, because we want the death of Aharon to activate tremendous rachamim in the Shamayim, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu will announce our final freedom, Bezrat Hashem, from this long and difficult galut, and He's going to say, guess what? Because of the tzaddik in the Shamayim, his yahrzeit, you're all free. Higia zman geulatchem. Go back home. Go back to the land that was destined for you. It's time for the Bet HaMikdash to be rebuilt. Hence, the parasha always coincides with Rosh Chodesh Av, which is the Askara of Aharon Cohen, because there's a lot going on in the Shamayim on that day, and there's a big push up there to redeem the Jewish people. It's a day of simcha. That's the symbolism of the psukim here. It's a pele plaot. People think on Rosh Chodesh Av, you have to sit and cry. Lo nachon, you have to do tshuva, because it's a day that's mesugal for geula shlema. And therefore, ladies, on Rosh Chodesh Av shouldn't be taken lightly. You should use it as an opportunity, obviously, so that we can finally be released of our bondage and we can finally go home. But of course, in order for that to happen, to go home, some aspects of Yahadut have to be corrected, because the truth is, we're in this galut for a reason, and it's lasted this long also for a reason. We're not here chinam, be'emet shelo. Chachamim say, and I'll quote them, yesh siba legalutenu, veyesh siba letzarotenu. There's a reason. But if we want our Father to take us home, there are a few things that we need to understand of why Jews have been korbanot throughout our history. Why have so many Jews perished al Kiddush Hashem? Why have so many young children been taken away from us, leaving their heartbroken parents with few answers? Why are we zoicha to the countless tears that we've shed? And what are those tears really worth in the heavens? Do we even know the power of a dim'ah, of a tear, and what it could do, what movement it activates in the heavens above? Do we realize that when we cry together, not just alone, those tears, Chachamim tell us that they rise up to the Kiseh HaKavod, precisely because we're gathered together and we're crying together. Some of us cry during the reading of the Kinot on Tisha B'Av. Why? But what do we cry? What do we cry about? Is it because of the loss of the Bet HaMikdash? And if yes, so what does that mean? You ever saw the Bet HaMikdash? You ever experienced the Churban? What are you crying about? You have to understand what you're crying about. You're actually crying about the Churban of the Jewish people. There's a Churban every single day. If you go out there, you'll see there's tremendous destruction. Jewish homes are falling apart. Children are going off the derech. Couples are separating. There's a Churban. There's a Churban. Rav Tzvi Meir Silverberg, alav shalom, gave a beautiful mashal. He said that there was once a couple who were childless for many years until HaKadosh Baruch Hu finally blessed them with a son. Their joy was obviously indescribable, and they showered this child with everything that he could possibly want. He was so spoiled. And as the child grew older, he became sick, unfortunately, and he almost died. So they took him from one doctor to the next, and nobody could find a cure except for one doctor. That doctor said that the child has to build up his antibodies in order to fight the disease in his system. But in order to do this, he would have to go to a special clinic, a special facility far away from his parents. And part of the treatment required him not to have any contact with his parents except for once a month. How would his parents be able to stay away from this child whom they loved so much? But they knew that for the good of this child, this is what they have to do. So in this clinic, the child was obviously no longer pampered. He was no longer given everything that he wanted. There was no nash, there was no snacks, there were no hugs, there were no kisses, there was no warmth, there was no affection in this clinic. But every month, he got permission to speak with his parents. And obviously the phone calls were so emotional. And his parents told him how much they loved him and missed him. And after 3 years of treatment, he became stronger, and the doctors notified the parents that he could now go home. And when his parents came to pick him up, they were so excited. But then all of a sudden, at the last moment, they see the doctor coming, and the doctor told him that unfortunately the tests came back and he has to stay another 2 years. The boy burst out crying. The mother nearly fainted from pain, from the yearning of wanting to be reunited again with her son. And once again, this little boy was left only with a phone call every month. But of course, this time, the phone calls were filled with caution, because the parents knew what had happened last time, and they didn't want to get their hopes up. And again, 2 years passed, and the parents went to pick up their child, their son, and the boy was so excited. But as they were leaving the clinic, the boy sees the doctor approaching from far, and he knew what that meant. And he began to cry. More treatments, more years in this clinic, but there was nothing he could do. And each time the parents were told that they couldn't see their child, his pain intensified and their pain became great. But as the years went by, this little boy lost hope. He became indifferent. He became used to the cold, robotic, and unloving ways of the doctor. He too became disconnected from love, from affection, from his own heart. And when the phone call came and his parents would tell him how much they love him and how much they miss him, he would pay them lip service, and he would barely reciprocate. He would barely say an "I love you" back. It was meaningless even if he did. It was very mechanical. It was empty. Says Rav Silverberg, the pain of these parents is like the pain of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's how He feels every time that we're about to be redeemed. We anxiously await for the moment that we'll be well enough to leave this clinic that we call Galut. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu waits. He waits with tremendous love to see us again, to take us home again, to embrace us once more. The Shekhinah cries because we've forgotten, because we've disconnected ourselves. And that's the pain for which we have to cry. We should cry for the parents, but we should cry for the child, because we are that child. We're the child that spent years in this clinic, that although it was meant to cleanse us of our illnesses, it's meant to heal us, we've grown accustomed to this facility's cold and empty ways. We've grown accustomed to the disconnection from family, from Hashem, from ourselves, and as a result, our connection to the Ribono Shel Olam has become very robotic, very mundane, without real oomph, without any enthusiasm, without real affection. It's just rote, it's lip service, and that's cause for great concern. One of the reasons given for the destruction of the first Bet Mikdash was done so by HaKadosh Baruch Hu Himself. B'chvodo ve'atzmo. He tells us why He destroyed the Bet HaMikdash. It says in Yirmiyah Hanavi, Al ma avda ha'aretz. For what reason did the land, so to speak, perish? For what reason was the land kind of destroyed? Why were we exiled? Vayomer Hashem, listen to this. Al azvam et torati, because they've forsaken my Torah. There you have it. Hashem tells you. The reason we're in the Galut is because we've abandoned the Torah. Now, Chazal list other reasons, of course. So how come this is the one associated with the destruction? How come? Not only that, there are many people that did not forsake the Torah and only made the sin, it says they only made the sin of omitting Birkot HaTorah. So what's going on over here? Let me explain. Actually, we have to ask a question. Did HaKadosh Baruch Hu destroy the Bet HaMikdash because we didn't say Birkot HaTorah? And if yes, isn't that a bit harsh? Chachamim say, the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed because we didn't take the time to recite Birkot HaTorah. Well, if that's true, isn't that a bit hard to understand? So the Chachamim, including the Ran, Rabbeinu Yonah, and others, they state that the reason the Jews of that time did not recite Birkot HaTorah was because the Torah suddenly became very unimportant in their eyes. Hitchilu lezalzel b'Torah, says the Gemara. They were learning Torah and they couldn't understand why we lost the land. Does that make sense? But HaKadosh Baruch Hu was teaching us that although they were learning Torah, they're sitting in the Bet Midrash and they're learning, they didn't regard it as important in their own eyes. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, they may have learned Torah, they may be sitting and learning, but they've forsaken its values, and they've forsaken me by virtue of that fact. It's difficult to understand this. How a person could be sitting and learning and not learning anything. Before David HaMelech Alav Shalom became king, he hid in a cave during Shaul's pursuit against him. When Shaul entered the cave, he didn't realize that David HaMelech was there. And David HaMelech, it says he cut off the corner of Shaul's cloak to prove to him that he was in a position to kill him, and he didn't kill him. Now that act by David HaMelech, it came to haunt him many years later. Because at the end of his life, David HaMelech was unable to keep warm. No matter how many blankets they put on him, he was always cold. And the lesson for David was the following. David, if you don't value the clothing, then the clothing will not keep you warm. What a musar askel this is, Chachamim tell us, because anything and anyone that's meant for you to value in life, if you do not value it, you're not going to derive pleasure from it. And it's only you who's going to feel the cold and the pain and the suffering at the end of the day. What a musar askel this is. So it's the same thing. The Chachamim couldn't understand why the Torah didn't protect us from the destruction. After all, the Gemara of Sotah tells us that Torah, someone who's sitting and learning Torah, it's protected from Yisurim. So how come the Torah failed to protect the Jews of that generation? They were sitting and learning. And the answer is, they were sitting and learning, it's true, but they no longer value the Torah. And as a result, its protective layer disappeared. The Ananei Kavod, so to speak, vanquished. Like David HaMelech's cloak did not warm him. So the Torah of that generation could not protect those who had learned it because they didn't value it. Do you understand the depth of what I'm trying to tell you? It's mamash a deep inyan. The Al-Shich HaKadosh Alav HaShalom tells us a powerful story that's going to drive this point home. He says that there was a king who had a servant that played magnificent music that brought him great joy. And one day, the king's officers told the king that the musician committed a crime. The king listened, but he didn't do anything about it. The next day, the king again was notified that the musician acted immorally. The king listened to the accusations, but again, he didn't punish the guy. Day after day, the musician would play his music, and the king ignored his misdeeds. One day, the musician got into a fight with somebody, and his hand was accidentally cut off. When the king heard this, he announced that the musician should be executed. The officers were shocked, and they asked the king, "Your Majesty, why did you change your mind about this musician?" And the king told his advisors, "Until now, I looked the other way when the musician sinned because I loved to hear his music. But now that he could no longer play, I have no reason to deal with him compassionately." Says the Al-Shich, when Bnei Yisrael sinned, they really should have been punished severely. But the music they played, the Torah that they learned, it provided them with an official pardon time and time again. However, once they stopped playing their music, when their hands were figuratively, kivyachol, cut off, then the king no longer had a reason to act with them in a compassionate manner. The most beautiful kind of song that could be played are those of Torah learning, of psukim, and the inspiration found in the notes of every musar askel that we learn. But if we don't value that learning, then it's like the musician whose hand was cut off, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu has no reason for us. He's to'elet. So the Midrash tells us of actually, to tie it all in, of a gruesome occurrence that took place during the first destruction. When I read this, actually brought a lot of tears to my eyes. It says that Nebuchadnezzar was actually celebrating the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash and his victory over the Jews. It's the first Bet Mikdash. And then he saw the Levi'im, who were considered the singers and the musicians in the Bet HaMikdash. And he demanded of them that they play some music to celebrate the occasion that the Jews were defeated and that the Bet HaMikdash had been destroyed. We're told that immediately upon his request, the Levi'im hung their instruments on the nearby trees, and they mutilated their fingers so that they shouldn't be able to play. What did they say? Ech nashir et shir Hashem al admat nechar. How could we sing the song of Hashem on alien soil? The Levi'im felt that for them, there was no more music. They understood the Jews had stopped playing the most beautiful songs, songs of Torah. They came to realize why the king was no longer treating them with mercy, and so they mutilated themselves because they felt that since the real form of Shirah had stopped, there was no longer any purpose for any other form of music. Interestingly, Tisha B'Av is the one day of the year, ladies, interestingly, that we're forbidden to learn Torah. It's as if we're commemorating the pain once more, that we were learning it, but we didn't value it. So on that day, we don't learn it at all. We sit on the ground and we cry for the music that once was, and we relive the pain of the silencing of that music. But ladies, it's not enough to cry. The crying has to lead to action. We have to recommit ourselves to play HaKadosh Baruch Hu's music once again. As wives and mothers, we have to value the sacrifices that our husbands want to make, the sons, that they should learn Torah. As women, we have to value the lessons that pertain to us, to our tzniut, to kedusha, to continue to learn the halachot and the musagim. You know, as you do when you attend these shiurim on a weekly basis, because these shiurim help to build a spiritual home, so that it can one day be filled with the light of Torah, and it could lift your spirit when you need it to. The Kscohen Rebbe Alav Shalom said that the month of Av is called Menachem Av for a good reason. We're in a way being Menachem Av. We're, so to speak, comforting the letters of the Aleph Bet. We comfort them by promising them that we're going to be Bezrat Hashem committed to learning Torah. We're going to encourage our husbands and we're going to encourage our sons to do it. We promise to see to it that every nuance of Torah, that every letter starting from Aleph Bet is not ignored, that has value. V'lachen, ladies, more than the month should give us comfort for a brighter future, we have to give it comfort. We have to give it nechama by promising to care, to value, and to appreciate the Torah that so often infuses our homes. We have to appreciate the songs of Torah that resound at our Shabbat table, whether it's through Divrei Torah, in our cars, for example, when we listen to a good shir, or when you tune in to Torah Anytime, like you're doing now, or when you log on to Al Sarah, and then you subscribe to our newsletters, which you really should be doing. I want you to do that. Sorry, I have to advertise for my own organization. I have to take the time to do that. Or whether it's a song that you listen to on J-Root. I like that station. I like it a lot. And it inspires you, it elevates you to a ruchani level. Or whether you're in your kitchens or your rooms, when all of a sudden someone walks in and you're discussing a lesson that you learned that day in school, from a friend, from a family member. These are all songs of Torah. So our commitment now should be to comfort HaKadosh Baruch Hu through our sincerity, so that the upcoming days can turn into days of joy and not sadness. We move on. Concerning the second destruction, the second Bet HaMikdash's destruction, I'm going to focus on only one point. There's so many points, but I want to focus only on one. You know, we're familiar with the expression that we wish each other before the start of Tisha B'Av. Everybody, first of all, it's very interesting. I always found it interesting. I used to go to camp, and I always knew that Erev Tisha B'Av is when everybody asks each other Mechila v'Selicha. It's interesting. Only on that day. Before, they didn't ask. After that, they never ask. On that day, they ask. Interesting. But anyway, we wish each other, we say, have an easy fast. And recently, we've transformed it into, have a meaningful fast. It's very nice. really very nice, but in order to make any fast meaningful, you have to understand why you're fasting, bichlal. We're fasting because our Bet Mikdash was destroyed. We're fasting because HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Shekhinah is no longer with the people. It's no longer with us. We're fasting because we've been sent into Galut and we're still waiting to be redeemed. There's so much pain and suffering. We're fasting because we haven't yet broken the barriers of Sinat Chinam, which was the focal cause of our situation today. Now, we've heard about Sinat Chinam, and we've heard about its effects on our fellow Jews, on our nation, even the world. But today, ladies, I'm not going to talk to you about the tragedies of Sinat Chinam. I think, every time this time rolls around, we're always talking about the tragedy of Sinat Chinam. But I don't want to talk about it because I assume you know the destruction that's caused inside the neshama of a Jew when your attitude towards him is one of contempt, of discrimination and judgment, and especially when you don't even know them. I assume you understand that your compassionate heart has to be open to see the pain and life of another Jew. And I'm sure you know how sad it is that it's only with the heart that one can truly see correctly, because what's essential is so often invisible to the naked eye. So to speak of Sinat Chinam, it's unnecessary right now. It's unnecessary. So I'm going to end the shiur by speaking of what we can do to restructure our neshamot. What could recreate our nation? What could restore our connection to each other and to the Ribono Shel Olam, so that we can help to finally rebuild the Bet HaMikdash. Ahava, love, it's a very powerful word. Many say it, they don't understand what it means. Many wish it upon themselves. They wish somebody could love them, but they don't know how to give love. Some think that they're giving it, but in their fervent desire to establish it, they could destroy it. We see this in relationships all the time, whether it's between a husband and a wife, brothers and sisters, friends. So today I'm going to teach you what love really means through a very, very powerful story. It's a true story that took place during the time of the great Baal Shem Tov of Michelstadt, alav Shalom. No more has to be said about loving a fellow Jew after this story. You see, the representative of the Baal Shem Tov of Michelstadt, which was in Germany, by the way, his name was Rabbi Seligman. Before the Baal Shem Tov passed away, Rav Seligman was called to his bedside, and he started to cry, Rav Seligman, and he said to the Baal Shem of Michelstadt, Rabbi, what's going to become of us all? What's going to become of me when you leave us? I haven't learned a trade in my life because I was serving you this whole time. I haven't even saved money. I don't know what to do. And the Baal Shem answered him, don't worry, you're going to be fine. I realize at this point in your life you can't learn a trade right now. But if you're going to follow my instructions, you're not going to need much in your life. And he told him, after my death, I want you to travel the entire country, year after year, just as you've done all your life. But this time, I want you to tell the people about our activities, about my life, about our yeshiva. And everywhere you go, you're going to be received with such kavod, and you're going to be richly rewarded for the stories that you're going to tell about my life. And that's what's going to sustain you. Now, please don't argue with me about this. And I say only this to you. Do as I have told you, because you're going to be doing me a great favor. Those were the Baal Shem Tov's last words to his endeared Talmid. After the Shloshim, Reb Seligman set out to fulfill his promise to the Rebbe. So he went from place to place, and he was welcomed with open arms. The entire world, the entire Germany, all of Europe waited to hear the stories of the great Baal Shem Tov of Michelstadt. Wherever he went, this Rav Seligman, he was received with honor, he was bestowed with gifts, with money. And one day, Rav Seligman heard that there was a very wealthy man living in Italy who was extremely pious and charitable. And this man was very intent on hearing the stories about the Baal Shem Tov of Michelstadt. And this man was prepared to compensate generously anyone who would tell him a story about the Baal Shem Tov of Michelstadt. And this man's name was Giuseppe Manasseh. He was a big machnis orchim. And so Reb Seligman decided to look him up. And he knew, Reb Seligman, that he had hundreds of stories to tell that would obviously make him a very wealthy man if this Giuseppe was indeed ready and willing to pay. So when the rabbi finally met with Giuseppe, he saw that he was a man around 50. He made an extremely dignified impression. And Giuseppe asked the Rav what the reason for his visit was. So the Rav explained that he was a Talmid of the great Baal Shem Tov of Michelstadt. When Giuseppe heard this, he was interested in the life and the activities of the Rebbe. He was ready to satisfy Reb Seligman's interest, ready to pay a large sum for every story he told. He was thrilled with the news, and he invited Reb Seligman to stay in his home for Shabbat, and he assured him, listen, you're going to receive a princely sum for your stories. Friday evening came along, and Rav Seligman was asked to start telling a story at the table, at the Shabbos table. A lot of people were there, and at this point something strange happened. Rav Seligman, who planned to tell the most beautiful and inspiring stories, couldn't get a word out of his mouth. His mind went blank, and he forgot everything. He racked his brains and he couldn't remember a single event. I couldn't understand why. He was going crazy. This never happened to him before. But there he was, silent. And it was impossible for him to remember even one story. Of course, some people at the table thought that he was a con artist. He was a crook who tried to force his way into this wealthy society under false pretenses. But this Giuseppe fellow noticed the Rav's genuine embarrassment and tried to calm the Rav. And he said, don't worry, Rabbi, you're still free to stay here. You're probably tired from your trip. Go rest. Perhaps tomorrow you'll feel a little better and you'll be able to share your rich treasures of stories. But on Shabbat day, the same thing happened. He didn't remember. And Rabbi Seligman was shocked. How could he have forgotten all the stories? He was so embarrassed. So on Motzei Shabbat, he approached this Giuseppe to thank him for his hospitality and to apologize. And he told him that he specifically made this trip because he heard that Giuseppe was willing to pay well for any story of the Baal Shem Tov of Michelstadt. And there he was. It was a mystery to him what was going on over here. And he couldn't understand why it was that since he arrived at the home of Giuseppe, he was unable to recall even one story of the Baal Shem. So he apologized and he told him, listen, I'm going to have to go back to my hometown, to Germany. And he left. He went up to sleep. The following day, Giuseppe begged this rabbi to stay one more day. But Reb Seligman was adamant about returning to Germany. But right before he left Giuseppe's presence, he told him the following. He said, Signor, the whole night, I racked my brains to tell you at least something before I leave you. I was unsuccessful. However, in this moment, while I was going up the stairs of your house, a very unusual story came to mind, and it's fresh in my mind as if it had happened yesterday, even though it took place 20 years ago. So I'm going to tell you what came to my mind as I was walking up the steps. You see, it happened 20 years ago that I was in the Baal Shem's office when he received his daily mail. after reading all his letters, he singled one out. He became very pensive, and then he called me over and he said, I'd like to accompany you on your trip to Dornbirn, where I have something urgent to take care of, and you could be of great assistance to me on this matter. I have to be in Dornbirn by the first Easter. So Reb Zeligman continues, and he says, and so we arrived in Dornbirn before Easter. And there was a great procession that was scheduled for Sunday. And the Bishop of Feldkirch was to be there to celebrate the High Mass. The house where we stayed was right across from the stage that the Goyim built. But no Jew was permitted to show his face on the streets on that day. On that Easter Sunday, the Rebbe, myself, and the whole family stood behind the closed shutters and observed the crowds of Goyim that populated the streets. And then the bishop arrived and made his way to the platform, to the stage. At that moment, the Rebbe said to me, I want you to go there and try to get as close to the bishop before he reaches the stage, and tell him, without anybody hearing you, that Reb Sekel Leib is here and wants to speak with him immediately. I stared at the Rebbe in horror. A Jew who dared to fight his way through the crowd and be seen on that day was playing with his life. But I did what the Rebbe told me. I pushed my way through the crowd, and miraculously I reached the bishop. I gave him the message, and I noticed how his face changed colors. And he whispered in my ear, I'll be with the rabbi in half an hour, as soon as I finish the Mass. So then I returned to the Rebbe, and I gave him the message. And he told me, you have to return and tell him I expect him immediately and not a minute should be wasted. Second time I made my way through the crowd, and again I relayed the message to the bishop. He then turned to one of the higher officials. He told them that he was not feeling well, and he asked them to take over the services while he goes to rest a bit. But meanwhile, he followed me through the crowd into the house unnoticed, and then into the room where the Rebbe waited to speak with him in private. They spoke for 2 hours. The rabbi came out of the room and then asked for his carriage because he wished to go back to Mechelstadt, while the bishop returned to Feldkirch. What these two spoke about, I don't know. I was always hoping the Rebbe would reveal it to me, but he never did. That never happened. It's clear to me that a great secret lies behind this meeting. And here's where I have to end the story, he says, because I don't know anything else. At that moment, Giuseppe got up, took both of Rabbi Zeligman's hands, and he thanked the Kadosh Baruch Hu for allowing him to live to this occasion. And then he began to speak. And this is what he told Rav Zeligman. Kvod Harav, this is the hour for which I longed for many years. You see, I am that bishop. I was 17 years old when I came to Mechelstadt, and I was one of the Rebbe's most promising students. At one point, I became friendly with the Count of Urbach. The Count had a very clever plan for my future. He asked me to teach him the Hebrew language, but this was all a part of a big plan to eventually get me and alienate me from Judaism and gain me for the church. I felt flattered by this, by his compliments, and I was convinced that if I remain a Jew, my talents would just wither away. And the Count convinced me of the great future that lay ahead of me if I converted to Christianity. And I left Michelstadt without anybody knowing of my decision to convert. But when the Rebbe said goodbye, He hugged me like a father embraces his son. And he blessed my journey, not knowing that I would never return. And so I began my ministry with the church while my family thought that I had died. I was then baptized, and since that day, the shame and regret has never gone away. Step by step, I advanced in distinction and wealth, and eventually I earned the position of bishop. I realized how worthless is all this wealth and glory, and I could no longer suppress my betrayal of the Ribono Shel Olam. And so I decided to write a letter to my beloved teacher, the Baal Shem Tov of Michelstadt. In my letter, I confessed my stained life, and I asked him whether there was any hope of forgiveness for this great sin that I committed. Then this Giuseppe got up, walked to his desk, and he pulled out of the drawer a stack of letters, a handful of letters. And he said, "This is the first letter I received from the Baal Shem Tov. You read it yourself, and tell me whether a father could write to a son in a more loving fashion." This letter encouraged me to have hope and to hope for forgiveness. And if a human being could be so forgiving, so kind and so loving, surely I could receive the same treatment from the Father of mercy. And the Rebbe begged me in his letters to give up my illustrious position and to come home at once. He promised that he would accept me warmly and lovingly and without judgments if I would only come home. So we wrote to each other for 2 years, and I wavered and I hesitated and I bargained with the Baal Shem Tov. And then I wrote that I want to celebrate Easter Mass one more time before I threw away all this glitter. But the Rebbe knew, he knew my heart better than I did. He knew how attached I was to the world of materialism. He feared that I was too weak to break my ties with Christianity, and that's why he came to see me on that day. When we spoke for 2 hours, he warned me that if I hesitated one more moment to make a complete tshuva, I would be lost forever. He urged me to lead a life dedicated to HaKadosh Baruch Hu if I wanted to be forgiven. And I agreed to do tshuva. And then he left me with these words: if at any time in your life someone will tell you the story of your own life, you will know that this is a sign from above that your sin has been forgiven by the Ribono Shel Olam. And I will not rest in the heavens until you are forgiven. So when I moved to Italy, I tried to hear as much as possible about the Baal Shem. I didn't care what it would cost me. So you could imagine how happy I was when I saw you again after all those years. I know you didn't recognize me because the last time you saw me, I was the bishop. But I want you to know that I was not surprised about what happened to you here. I realized that your loss of memory was a sign that I had not been completely forgiven by HaKadosh Baruch Hu for my sins. But Baruch Hashem, your visit showed me how God is compassionate and gives people a chance. It also showed me how much my dear teacher loved me unconditionally. Since your arrival to my home, I have prayed with such kavanah to find favor in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's eyes and to be able to hear from your lips the story of my life. That's why I begged you to stay another day. And I spent the entire night without sleep, but rather with Torah and tefillah on my lips. And now I see that God has listened to my tefillot and granted me mechila. How could I ever repay the love of the Baal Shem Tov of Michelstadt? How could I repay the love of my Rebbe? Rebbe Seligman sat there with tears in his eyes, and he said, There's no doubt in my mind that the Rebbe loved you so much that he purposely made me the storyteller of his life so that you could have a chance to live. Yodea Hashem yemei temimim v'nachalatam le'olam tiyeh. Hashem knows the days of the perfect and their inheritance will be forever. And he continued and he said, when I behold the Kedusha in your home, Mr. Giuseppe, when I observe the Kiddushei Hashem in your life that you're making right now, I realize more and more that all of this is a consequence of the Ahavat Chinam and the goodness of the Baal Shem Tov of Michelstadt. Amazing story. Amazing story. The love this man has shown, the good deeds which his hands put into the lap of time will never be lost. And that's why I told you this story, so that you could learn by example and carry yourselves to lofty heights, correct the derech of Ahavat Chinam, and help save a life. Yehi Ratzon, may the love of the tzaddik for every Jew be a lesson to us all. May the zechut of our achdut and ahava and kedusha, the Kiddushei Hashem that we want to do in the world, but more than that, the love that we have for one another should rebuild and unite us and the Bet Mikdash, us and the Ribono Shel Olam, and the Ribono Shel Olam to his final destination, the Shekhinah with its final destination. You should have a Shabbat Shalom, a Chodesh Tov, and a meaningful fast B'ezrat Hashem.